and welcome to the first ever Higher Origins podcast. This is kind of a pilot. We're testing this out. I'm Daniel.
Hi, Matthew.
Yeah, okay, that worked out. That part's good. We can continue with that. So we're just going to be talking about a few little topics that have been on our minds recently about the California cannabis industry, and yeah, just give our thoughts, opinions, and experience on that. First of all, what have we been working on recently, Matt? What's the kind of the direction of Higher Origins been the past couple days?
Marketplace, as well as building out some license search tools, working on some fancy little graphs, but just continual improvements on the platform.
Hell yeah. Yeah, we just are always trying to make it so people can look at the industry in a way that they haven't before. So things like the graph view basically allows you to see who owns what license, how all of these different cannabis conglomerates are stuck together, because it's really kind of a rabbit hole if you were trying to look into a company and actually to see where your weed came from. That's something I've been working on a lot recently. I'm in the middle of writing an article about taking your average eighth off the shelf or your average cannabis product off the shelf in California, looking at the packaging and figuring out who grew it. This is a problem. It turns out that in California, the regulations don't actually require you to put the name of the farmer on the package, which personally, I mean, here at High Origins, we have some thoughts on that, but I don't know. Other people might actually think it's a good thing that you can't see where it came from. So I don't know. What do you think about that, Matt?
I mean, from a small farm standpoint, obviously you want, the name of the farm on the packaging. I think as a consumer, you'd like to know where your products came from. Naturally, like the cases of like organic produce and, those other aspects in traditional agriculture, you see more, I guess, a demand for that product. While in the cannabis space, even though that there are certifications out there for OCal ICCOF, which is your organic comparable certification, or third parties, Sun and Earth, Clean Green, I think are a few to name. Um, we're not seeing as much as the consumer demand or the value at market as one of those farms. Um, so I think that ends up being more um, it's an aspect of I think the industry where it needs to work on in terms of transparency, because there is no transparency in where your product came from. So you tend to get a lot of like misleading in the market, in terms of marketing dollars, where you see these large brands continuously shift the language and wording of their own products to try to be on par with what a lot of the smaller brands in the market are doing,
Right.
trying to kind of mask that fact that they are this large, big, corporate entity. Um,
Yeah. And that's the thing you mentioned earlier, like how it's a consumer demand thing that they consumers want to know where their weed came from, but also the fact that large brands are copying that. They're throwing stuff like craft, legacy. We've been in this forever. The common clay of the farmer of America. They really lean into that, and most of the time it's bullshit. But it definitely goes to show that it is a demand, and that I feel like also screws over retailers too, right? Because if you're a retailer and you just take your average retailer in California, the majority of what's going to be on your shelf is large brand kind of commodity products, which think of your Stizzies, your cookies, your all the various large brands. They don't really have much of a story. They don't have really much of an identity, and if you're trying to sell those brands as a bud tender, I mean, obviously, what strain it is, kind of BS, doesn't matter. Like the effects of it, total BS, doesn't matter. So you're really kind of left selling based on the vibe of the packaging and like the THC content and the kind of just like how much it costs. So
oh
not
yeah, I
having
mean it
access,
ends up
yeah,
being a lot of lifestyle shopping, I think, with cannabis, to where you're not really buying based on what's in the jar. You're buying based on what's, the look of the jar or any of, those lifestyle components that go around with that jar in terms of these larger brands such as, cookies and Stizzies and Connecteds and all of those. Um,
And that story is kind of
and
hollow, but if small cultivators usually have more unique stories that they can use to promote. I mean, if you're a retailer, you can tell the story about this cool old guy who's done all this stuff, who lives out in the hills, who's got all these crazy anecdotes. That's like really kind of a more compelling sales. I mean, I'm obviously biased, but that seems like a more compelling sales point to me rather than this is grown by some faceless corporate people in a million square foot warehouse and they paid somebody on Fiverr to write that they were legacy on their website, you know. It
well,
just
I
doesn't
do,
land.
I do I do think that there's an aspect of the industry where you have brands that don't necessarily grow their own product. They're sourcing through some, distribution network. So they will oftentimes have the face of their brand be like this legacy, 200 years plus of, cultivation experience and things like that. But what ends up being is are just hollow promises, and then they're just buying, glass house flour, for the cheap. And so you end up getting this market where consumers, even though they do feel like they have choice in the market, they it's an illusion because there's so much of this corporate grown weed, glass house growing 400,000 pounds, roughly 2,000 small farms if each one of them's growing 200 pounds. Uh,
Yeah.
it's a huge force, and LA has more of like that corporate, grown in a field cannabis versus, actual, small farm, where you're growing, a couple hundred plants to, at the most in that end, 1,000 plants.
Yeah, and like, because you mentioned that like you can really say whatever you want on the packaging, and then really the weed in the jar can be really anything. That also gives that kind of gets into the fact that distros are kind of black boxes, and they really take advantage of that to be able to do their brokering, to do their arbitration of like buy low, sell high, or because like if you are a brand or a farm and you sell to a wholesaler and they're like, oh yeah, this will go into our premium eighth line, like you can buy it. And then they just are like, yeah, well, screw that. Like, we can make more money by using this other weed in this jar. And so, like, even though they say that, you as the farm don't actually know that that's what they did. They might have found a way to make money, more money by, switching it around. And that's like, so obviously the farm doesn't isn't sure that the distro has actually gone through with what they said they would do. That's one thing. Also, the consumer, like if the consumer really likes the weed that they bought, they can't really source it again. I mean, sure, they can buy, big brand Kush, the same label and everything, but like a couple months later, it might be a complete different thing from a different farm. And so if that was something that they really liked, it was a standout experience, or if they were a patient and whatever the terpene, the chemical compounds in that specific strain really helped their symptoms, they can't get it again. So like this is just more stuff that like that obfuscation. And I mean it's just also it makes it easier for the distro to rip off the farms, right? Because if I'm a farm, I sell my weed to a distro for a certain amount of money, and I know for a fact that it's going to be in this jar, and I go to the dispensary and I see that jar and I'm like, wow, they're selling this jar for like $60, but they're giving me like nothing. I know that there's a massive difference in margin that I'm getting screwed on,
Yeah.
and I might consider self branding at that point. But if I don't know where it's going, what product it is, I don't really know what the consumer market is valuing my product at. So I don't really know what my opportunity is, how much money there is to be clawed back from the system if I self brand. So
Well, I mean, as a small farm, there's nothing to be clawed back because they want to squeeze us out. I mean, just running from a small brand perspective and trying to even enter markets such as LA, where you have these large mega farms, these mega indoors that are doing millions of square foot of cultivation, hundreds of thousands of pounds annually. You know, in terms of what, like a small farm, 5,000 square foot, growing a couple 100 pounds, in terms of what they could financially cover in order to get to market in LA, especially coming from a farm in Mendocino County, the round trip on gas and everything to go into that main like economic hub of LA, where they're doing the majority of the sales in the state in terms of cannabis consumption at retail. Small farms, which have been predominantly in Northern California, whether that's Mendocino County, Trinity, Humboldt, Nevada County, Lake County, you know, they they're more or less getting their money siphoned from rural communities down into cities. These large farms who are, when you look into it and you start following the money, you end up seeing these cases to where, these farms are investing in so much of the different aspects of the industry that you have to, beat a dead horse as a small farm just to even get access to a retailer. And that takes getting the approval from the buyers, the bud tenders, and constantly working them, and and then like the sales aspect of just trying to get your product on the shelves. And once you've achieved that and you've gotten into a retailer, you start the next hurdle to where now you have to earn the trust and the loyalty from their customers, or else you get this scenario where retailers don't give a small farm brand any coverage because there's no audience for them. So there's no helping building each other up. It's very cutthroat once you get into that aspect of the industry down there.
Yeah, and it's like the building trust. I mean, that's another thing because you don't really know if that's because people are like actually buying your weed and smoking it saying, wow, this is crap, I don't want it, or they're just not getting told that it's even any good because like the bud tender is not incentivized to do so because you are also on the shelf with something from Stizzy or something from Glass House or something from some other massive company who has some incentive structure built into that relationship with that retailer while you don't. And buyers, I think a lot of times buyers actually kind of do want to get small farm product, but they just are so used to the kind of like accessible kickback structure of a corporate working with big corporate brands, and the fact that oh yeah, whatever, we can just like those brands have such large economies of scale that they can play margins much more, and work with
Oh,
retailers.
absolutely. And in the case of like Glass House, where you are the farm producing product and you're also playing the side of the retailer with pharmacy, you get like an even more insane view where they're controlling both ends. They're getting the most margin out of really anyone, and that's why their portfolio is so large in that aspect. And but it's
That actually is
crazy
interesting
to.
because if you're thinking about like one of these vertically operated retailers where they own a mega farm, they own the retailer, they own the distro, they own the manufacturing, they own the whole stack, and you go in there, and of course they have, I've been into pharmacy locations before, which is owned by Glass House, and they've got Glass House weed and they've got Glass House merch, and they're really pushing. Maybe not anymore. Their PR isn't great these days, but uh, it's everywhere. But then you look across the shelves, and just knowing what I know about all of the different brands that they work with, there's like five or six other brands on their shelves, but those don't say where that weed came from. So it's kind of interesting if there's like this identity crisis where like they don't want to admit to the consumer that we're selling you the same exact weed across four or five different price points, four or five different shelf levels, and four or five different brands, but it's the same shit and you're paying, 15, 20, 25, 30, 60 for the same stuff. And that's another reason why this whole putting the farm on the package thing kind of comes together, is it kind of undercuts that game. And this is one thing I kind of struggle with because like this is capitalism. Everybody likes a good hustle, everybody likes a good sell, you know. And there's cannabis is a special industry, especially in California, because the level of information that's collected, which allows us to do the nerd stuff that we do. But but realistically, a lot of this information gathering isn't necessary. It's just kind of government overreach for monitoring. Um, I don't know how I feel about this. Is a sticking point where it's like if we make the farms put we the sorry if we make the brand put the farmer on the packaging, it takes away this whole like aspect of the retail game which exists in every other industry. So that is something I kind of struggle with when it comes to the argument of put the farm on the packaging every time. So naturally, ideologically, I'm okay with it because it affects big brands more than small farms, and I'm here for the small farm. But it's like
Well,
maybe they
I can
should be able
say
to
that
play
there's
that
a
game
lot.
too.
I would almost argue that there's a lot more. Like there are brands that go and they talk about how they support farms and whatnot, and they do label the farm when they source it from them.
Oh, absolutely.
Um, they don't have any issues with it, and it ends up being a thing to where now you as a farm you have a little bit more control. If you're able to go to retail and see that, okay, my product is actually being packaged in all these different eighths that are now selling for $40, but like you were mentioning earlier, you end up only getting $5-6 an eighth, at the end of the day, and we're all in this scenario where the markets aren't great. We're all looking to try to survive the market. And when we have forces that are taking more of the pie than they realistically need in order to like float themselves at that point in time,
Yeah,
it just ends up being this cycle to where you're crawling on the backs of others.
yeah, and I suppose if a vertical farm retailer has, like I mentioned, like five different price lines, all from the same farm, well, if that model was broken by requiring the farm to be on the packaging, then that would open up many more opportunities for other people to actually like more clearly have the quality levels and price lines reflect the reality of of supply, demand, quality, etc. Um, so I guess speaking of quality, there's another aspect of this that has a few little thorny subjects in it, and that's like recalls, safety, testing, stuff like that. Because a lot of the a lot of the packaging requirements in the state are based upon valid or not, but arguments around consumer safety.
Yep.
And so, in the situation where there's a product that gets recalled for whatever reason, contamination, etc., and you don't know what farm it came from, you go like if you go right now on the California DCC's list of recalls for whatever reasons, a lot of them just stop dead at the manufacturer, the distributor. You can't find out what farm it came from. And because of the process it goes through testing, like it gets tested, it goes to the distro, and then it gets tested again, like you'd think that it would lay the responsibility for the contamination would lay on the distro, but if by any reason it came from the farm, like wouldn't you want to know that it happened at the farm? But
I mean, in
like,
theory, they know that information from a metric standpoint. I mean, they probably have some report that they can run that goes, this product came from these distros, and, technically speaking, it came from, this farm, and then I guess work backwards in terms of where that product or that package, was sourced from and what distros you worked in. Um, but a lot of the times for the COA test, because you're packaging or you're testing it on a packaged good, you're testing it at the last moment, before, retail. And so that's, another thing that I guess that might not be so reflective if, like, for example, if you're a small farm brand, you sell some pounds to, a brand, they package it up, but in that time, they don't store it correctly. The moisture gets too moist. It starts to mold. They package it anyways. Then you kind of get this scenario to where it wasn't necessarily the farm's fault. So that's realistically
yeah,
where you get into that weird gray area technicality where there might be a broader issue with the product, more in the sense of like, I guess like a pesticide or some other chemical that's found on the product that is,
Yeah.
usually used in large scale grows,
And there's
you
like two
know.
sides to it because like on one hand, if I was a farmer and I found out that like my product that a product that contained my weed further down the line at the consumer product level tested badly, I would want to know that A to make double check it wasn't me,
Yeah.
and B if it wasn't me to know that the distro that I sent it to screwed it up in some way. So like that's two important
Well,
pieces
I
of
mean,
information you need.
another reality that could also happen, that because distribution's a black box, and I think a lot of inspectors or regulators, 2 pounds look the same. So there's not much to say or really stop distribution from just swapping pounds or swapping in product, under a COA, or, they had someone that came by that wanted to buy those bulk, and, they already paid the COA. So you hear a lot of stories where, they will then just source some other product that was close enough to the name, and then they throw it in there and,
Yeah.
call it a day. So you have that level of contamination where, you know, now because you have distribution, it's this black box to where you don't really know. Like from a consumer standpoint, you just have all of this just a layer of extra, obscurities.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess another little element of this when it comes to like the farm getting the test, the distributor manufacturer getting the test and then it fails is kind of the PR aspect, right? Because like if I'm a small farm or if I'm a farm and I send it to a distro and they screw it up and it tests, in the current situation, if they didn't put me on the packaging, it's all their fault.
Correct. Yeah.
I don't lose any, I don't have a PR crisis to deal with because no one knows that it came from me. Um, so that is kind of, I guess, a bonus for a farm. But at the same time, I think that most farms, especially small farms who like actually kind of take pride in their product, would want to know regardless if something downstream tested wrong.
Well, sure, but I do think that's also like a testament to, if you're a consumer and you want to ensure that the people putting out the product are putting out, product that they would consider as representative of their farm. Source farm brands. There are plenty of small farm brands that you can source from, that put their name on the jar. Their farm name's the same name that's, there on your packaged good. And oftentimes, you do get like, better product that way versus having, nameless pounds go out to a distro, and then they're, in the distribution blender that gets tossed out to a bunch of different packing facilities and manufacturers and white labeled because, you know, they're buying, oftentimes 50, 100 pounds bulk from these farms, and then they're splitting them up, 5, 10 pounds per brand, and they wage the market that way. Some of it can go into a cheap brand that's meant for the bottom of the shelf. Some of it can go into some high end, and they will sit there and play the games to where they're averaging out ahead.
Yeah,
It's they're working the numbers a lot more than any farmer would. Which, if you want good weed, you hope that your farmer's paying attention more to the plants than the numbers. But
yeah, and I mean, like you said, like if their name's on there, it shows that they're standing by their brand. It shows that they're standing by their quality. It's not just you're not just buying the Safeway or Walmart great value version. Great value weed.
yeah, that
um,
you get good weed every once in a while.
yeah, that, and like you mentioned, how it's like the product is split up. That also kind of raises another issue with putting your name on the packaging because when it comes to concentrates and stuff like that, I mean, some of these concentrates have many different harvests in them. Like if you're just going for just cheap commodity oil, you could have dozens of different farms worth of weed in the same concentration
Oh,
level.
absolutely. They make it into crude, and it's they just sell it into liters, and they pump it into pens and sit there and inject the terpene profile so that they're just right to play along with a blue dream or a haze, or whatever flavor of the day you want.
Yeah,
Um,
because like just
it-
generic biomass is like if you're going to be doing things that way, there's no way that that final product is going to list, 40 different farms. Like you can't put all that on a
no,
pan.
no, no,
So
no.
like if there was a theoretical new regulations change that would say, hey, this needs to be done that way, would it just completely skirt around concentrates? Would it
Well, so
be,
concentrates already have, at least in California and in metric, when you make any product where you're taking out of its original form, so like you're grinding up, flour to make a pre-roll, or you're turning it into hash or concentrates or, what have you. You register it as a production batch. So that's when you're sourcing multiple different components to make this product. So it's treated as a separate system within metric.
okay,
But one thing to consider with testing, especially for concentrates, you have limits that for flour in terms of like mold is a specific one, some pesticides where they falls below legal limit on the flour for smoking, but then in the concentrate side, because they're running the distillation process and they're concentrating everything, you end up getting a concentrated form of that, pesticide or whatever that problem is that might make it fail. And obviously there's remediation methods for all the different, things of it. Um, but having it be like tested and treated as its own separate thing because you are altering the product is probably more smart than because then it's kind of, the working of that brand. Um, as maybe a side skirt to that, you have to list the manufacturer,
yeah,
whoever's doing the oil, taking in all the different biomasses and combining it into this new product.
yeah, because I mean, there's tons of vapes out there that fail all the time. I mean, it's one of the biggest market categories. They're failing, and it's usually the cheap ones with a gazillion different brands in it, or gazillion different harvests in it that are failing for that reason you mentioned. So,
Well, I mean, and it does like if you're in the industry long enough, I mean, one of the more common phrases that I've heard coming from extraction facilities is the solution to pollution is dilution.
yeah,
So, these a lot of the times, you're profit minded and you're going to, how do you turn this person who has pounds that won't pass testing into an opportunity? You just go through, buy dirty pounds, make your oil out of them anyways, and mix it right in concentration until it falls below your testing levels, call it a day.
yeah.
There's
The various inputs to a product problem for labeling the farm on the product is a sticky one. I don't have an
I mean, it's
immediate
gotten
solution.
better. It's gotten better since, pre-legalization. I mean, I remember the early days when like the Emerald Cup started requiring testing and everyone was going down to I think it was Steep Hill. And they were getting product tested, and a lot of it was failing because there's a lot of people just use nasty things.
Yeah,
And that's been one aspect of the licensed market is that you get cleaner product, but I think as anything shows, the whole market, has seen cleaner product, not just that one side. So
yeah. And I mean, I guess there are now like more certifications like Sun and Earth, like CCOF. Sorry, not CCOF.
OCal,
OCal, sorry. Specifically not
by
CCOF.
CCO,
Yeah,
don't say organic, they'll come
yeah,
after
can't
you.
say that. All right. Yeah, so your farm, Mendo Mystic, has one of those certifications. Can you talk about that a little bit and how that may or may not help small farms?
At its current state, I don't think it helps.
Okay.
I mean, it costs money every year. We have to pay money in order to have the certification. Makes sense. They come out do an annual inspection. Makes sense. Honestly, our inputs are so basic and simple that we're cover cropping. We're using local compost. We're using local aged wood chips compost teas. Oftentimes they come up and like look at our setup and they go like, yeah, you guys are like not even a risk category, and it's like usually they're here for an hour and gone, and a lot of it's just chit chatting and having a good time.
And this is
Um,
for which certification?
OCal,
Oh, Cal.
CCOF.
Right.
Um, there is Sun and Earth, which a few of the other farms that we know, such as Marty Wana, who's also on Higher Origins. He's gotten Sun and Earth. Um, good programs. I mean, they're all kind of have this idea where you're either doing sustainable techniques or regenerative. So you're actually going and planting other natives and doing things to kind of make the entire environment around you better. We go through, plant a bunch of native plants and do all of your beneficial plants, companion plants. You try to make nature work for you, as much as possible, keep the cost down. Um, but yeah, it's one of those things to where we're already doing all these techniques and it's just another certification thing that we can throw on the jar so it doesn't necessarily hurt. But we haven't seen like going into a retailer and them going, oh, that's great, and offering us more money for our jars.
Yeah, it
In
doesn't
fact, they
translate to. There's not necessarily a payback. It seems. That's sad.
No, no, we went into a retailer that was proudly displaying, we carry, CCOF, OCal products, like there were supporters. You go in there, we show them the product, tell them that we're OCal certified, and all that they can do is they say, well, we get plenty of mixed light for $4 an eighth, and pretty much told us to hit the road, which is not sustainable for a small brand.
Yeah, that's. I've definitely noticed that. Unfortunately, and it's. I'll be polite when I say this. There's a lot of retailers who just the way they need to make money can't like they can't always put their money where their mouth is when it comes to supporting groups like that, and it's unfortunate. Um, some of them obviously just say that as just lip service and don't actually care. Others actually do care, but they just can't pay. They can't make enough money selling that. That the margin isn't good enough. There are a few special ones out there who can do both, but yeah, and I just feel like that all the money that is spent on those certifications doesn't really go to much. I haven't ever seen like specifically like this is the OCal Cup. This is you can go on the OCal podcast and listen to these farms. You can
I
see like
mean, like
there's no marketing around it or Sun and Earth.
Sun,
I don't
Sun and
think.
Earth has done like Sun and Earth and Certified Clean Green have done, and like our EnviroCan, I believe, is also like a OCal partner,
Oh, okay.
where they do the certifications as well. Um, like Sun and Earth has probably been the leading example in terms of like marketing and like going out and trying to get retailers to be like Sun and Earth certified retailers and like create this network. But ultimately, I ultimately, I think they've all fallen a little short in terms of following through on those aspects. And now we're like seeing that it's tough. It like ends up they obviously they charge you your certification fee depending on how much money you brought in. Most people that I know that are running certification aren't bringing in much these days, so it ends up being like $420. Like I think that's the actual number that they have. We're told that's largely just as like an inspector fee that they come out, and that pays the inspector to drive from Sacramento or wherever they're coming from.
Right.
Um, so I mean, if the state were to come in like the DCC and actually say, hey, we're going to like officially lift up, OCal as a certification and try to drive more people in that direction. Sure, there's a lot of things where they could do probably with policy, or something in like the similar vein of like the equity programs
Yeah.
where like certain retailers and equity zones they have to go through and purchase certain amount of product from equity brands. Um, but yeah, we don't see any of that. We still get offered the same low prices. So it is an additional cost that we bear, to have it there to say that we support. But yeah, it doesn't really do a whole lot for us at this current moment.
Yeah, and I think just in the market, one of the stickiest issues is education, either of consumers or retailers and their bud tender staff, because you have like on one hand nerds like us who are like everything's a hybrid, THC percent doesn't really matter, just have terpenes, grow out like full term outdoor, all these things, and like yeah great we're nerds, but your average consumer doesn't know about, or if they do know a little bit about it, don't really care about that. The main leading thing that people buy on is price. So
Yes,
like
and it ends up being a situation to where you almost have, or like the retailer, because you have, and like the one that always comes to mind is like cookies, because they have this large apparel brand, they have a following, kind of more, the music side of the industry, fashion,
yeah,
the,
streetwear
the, the
culture, all that.
trapper, streetwear, all that. Um, that even, I mean, just even going by some shops, cookie shops even, and then pulling out jars after I show them our small farm full term outdoor product, and they go like, "Wow, that has way more of a smell than our stuff." It's like you open up their jars, it's like no smell. It looks pretty. That, they're happy to spend, 50, $60 an eighth, whatever your regionality will bear. And as a retailer, like, what are you going to tell the customer they're wrong? Are you going to say no, don't buy that? And so they're kind
Exactly.
of in this gotcha. So you have a lot of what feels like marketing dollars and money that went into this whole idea to where, you're buying weed based on a lifestyle instead of buying weed on weed.
Yeah, and there are other obstacles to it. Obviously, certain places allowing smell jars, or the level of interaction you can do with the product before you buy it is one thing for sure. Because some eights you open the jar and you can smell the damn thing across the room. Other ones like you basically shove it up your nose and you can't smell anything. That on its own is an impact. But like I just and the whole thing with like indica sativa hybrid, which for anyone listening or watching is pseudoscience at best. The strongest evidence you can put behind it is just like loosely categorizing sometimes how the plants look, but that's not based on any real science. Anyway, that's a whole different conversation. The thing is, though, that when you go to a store, they always ask first question, indica or sativa or hybrid, and everyone's like, I don't know, I just want to get high and watch TV, and they're like, well, you probably need an indica because it makes you more chill and couch locked, which is like total bullshit. There's no connection between supposed genetic and the chemovar of the plant. That hasn't been proven yet. So we're basically like just we have a very convenient easy lie that just fits right into like the cultural awareness of this thing, and it's just so convenient to run like that. And like you said, if like you don't want to tell a consumer no, like somebody's going to walk in and have their ego attached to their weed knowledge about indica and sativa, and then you're like, sorry, that's actually bullshit. You need to look at the terpenes, and they're like, well, I don't want to buy here. So like, how do you walk that line? What is the this is an argument. This is a suggested solution which I don't ideologically agree with, but would be interesting. And I think we've talked about this before with THC percentage. What if they just didn't? What if they specifically made it so you couldn't put that on the packaging? What if instead of like because you pick up your average eighth, it's going to say indica, sativa, whatever. What if that just wasn't there? What if people had to come up with some other bullshit? Because realistically, the bud tender picking up that jar is not going to know if it's indica or sativa unless they read the damn label. Like, so what if we just took that
True. I
away
mean,
as a point of bullshit and made people be more creative? I guess. Um,
yeah, but I mean, they're gonna come up with some other way to label it, and it's just gonna be as untransparent, as opaque as possible, to where you look at it and you're like, I guess I'm buying this,
yeah, that's
because
true.
it makes training bud tenders way easier when you can go, okay, here's two questions to ask a customer, hand them a product, next person.
Yeah,
That's
and that's the
like once you
thing. Like,
get
I suppose that is true because if you're gonna, okay, so say somebody snapped their fingers tomorrow and that went away as like a thing that you were ever legally allowed to use to refer to weed. The very next
Like
day,
even
the
if you were to do
biggest brand,
effects, right?
what?
Like even if you were to do effects, like this makes you sleepy, this makes you happy, this makes you energized. Like a lot of those aren't really based in a single point. They're
Well, they are based on a single
like
point
like
because it's like the one dude in the back of the warehouse smoked it and he's like, "Yep, this is what it is," and then that becomes like the God's truth of what that product is for that one dude. But that's just what they put on the website. Um, I, effects descriptions for weed to me are hilarious. They all seem it's like a euphoric, uplifting thing that makes you feel relaxed, and it's like it's all the same
well,
words.
I mean, it's in a similar vein as like astronomy, where you read it and you're like, oh yeah, that's totally me. And but
Or
like you're
astrology,
like getting
astrology. Yeah,
astrology.
that's true. Yeah, like dude, that would happen though. Like literally, if you got rid of sativa indica, some company or somebody would come up with like, all right, well, we're not using that anymore. That's passe. Now like we're separating weed by like alpha and beta. Like, are you an alpha weed or a beta weed? Or are you
Now
like a
you
Pisces
think
or a
that
Gemini weed? Like, there's gonna be some other woo woo concept.
you think of like from a retailer perspective though, if you were able to steer your audience in a way to where it wasn't necessarily based on indica sativa hybrid, and it was more in like the similar vein of like historically how the weed industry has worked is you have your middlemen, which are usually a buddy that comes into town every so often. Have your pounds. That buddy is known for going out and getting a certain amount of certain type of pounds. They have a buyer coming to town. Oh, you like XYZ? Oh, I got your thing. They collect those pounds that they think the buyer wants, put them in front of them. um, and it's much harder to do in like the license industry, to where you have, I mean, effectively like every step in like the supply chain pre-legalization was like a curated experience,
Yeah.
where the buyers were trying, or the sellers were trying to place product with the buyers and like make that efficient. Whereas consumers currently, they have so little to buy from. um, and they ultimately just need to, and I guess this kind of like loop back into a benefit of having like a farmer product on, or like the farmer name on packaging, is that if you start smoking weed from Mendo Mystic or Marijuana, or any of these different farms, and you really enjoy the way that they cultivate and their microclimate and their line of genetics, because we all kind of hold on and gravitate towards our own lineage of genetics that necessarily a big corporate farm might not be. A
Mm.
corporate farm might go, we need to put in 200 different varieties, and have 100 pounds of each, and produce that, where every year our products are different. And if you were able to um, force your consumers in such a way that were like promoted more, I think, like exploration within like product, that they would end up coming out ahead.
Yeah, and I mean that's definitely a thing. Like you can give people the opportunity to kind of like nerd out and explore, and there are many products out there in the alcohol industry that do this. You can buy, your wine explorer kit and they send you six different bottles of wine and a little blurb about it, or cigars. I mean, for some reason I have always gotten cigar pamphlets in the mail at my house, but I don't smoke cigars, but it's the whole thing. It's like get the 20 different varieties from like Guatemala, and there's like a bunch of information like, so there are ways to frame that, but I just don't know how.
Well, but like, why as a retailer, like, would you opt to carry 20 different SKUs of Stizzy versus 20 individual farms?
Exactly, that's the question. It just doesn't really make sense. There's not enough margin in the market, especially with these massive brands and their economies of scale that are really tuned to like influence retailers' buying habits, what's going to make that worthwhile as a store? I think the lack of development of these like cultural norms around like the new legal cannabis is simply because there just isn't enough margin for financial error to gamble on things like that.
You have like retailers like Local Roots where you go in there and they have hundreds of SKUs of many, many different small farms in their shelves. And then you go just a few hours down the road to Santa Rosa into a place like Nug, for example, and it's like four brands, and one of them's Glass House, and it's like a much different buying experience that I'm shocked as like a consumer they even put up with the ladder. Like
It's
it's like the
yeah.
difference of shopping like at Whole Foods pre-Amazon and then shopping at Whole Foods post-Amazon.
Yeah, but it's also the thing, I mean like think about it like liquor stores. I mean, I can go down to the 7-Eleven and get like Steel Reserve and Twisted Tea and Mike's Hard Lemonade, or I can go to like the fancy like locally run like whiskey bar or whiskey store and find all these fancy things on the shelves that are like cool local distilleries and rare things. So it's like it's just like different slices of the clientele. Like
Well, with regulation and license structure, though, you end up having this scenario whereas like Glass House would be considered your end of the street liquor store weed that you would go in and purchase it,
yeah.
and small craft farm would be your high end experience. Instead, we're in this scenario to where because of their influence, because of the policy climate, because of the licensing process, you get large farms who are able to dictate retail and then control the upper end of the market, while the smaller farms that don't have access to these networks, that are unable to get into these retail chains, or unable to get into distribution and package and build their brand, they're getting the short end of the stick
Yeah,
constantly.
it's very kind of running a little bit with the alcohol analogy in a slightly different direction. It reminds me of like the craft beer explosion because for decades and decades and decades, America drank Pilsner and lager, like Bud Light, Coors, all of your standard Miller Lights, like blonde light beer, and that was just what beer meant in America. And then all of a sudden, the 90s started to really kick off these brands like Samuel Adams and Anchor Steam and Sierra Nevada, which just exploded. And suddenly everybody was a hophead. Everybody was drinking IPAs. Suddenly normal people were drinking like saisons and sours and all these strange ass beers. And so like that can happen. Um, I actually have to profess ignorance. I don't really know what the market drivers, like the market conditions behind enabling the craft beer explosion were, but it would be interesting to research and see if there's like parallels between that and like what I don't know. In an ideal world, maybe we have a craft cannabis explosion in a year or two, and
I mean, realistically, like craft cannabis exposure or not, one quick way I think to solve the problem is just remove retail from the picture and allow farms to directly ship from their farm.
yeah, that is kind of a thing. I mean, I suppose in the case of craft beer, there was also like a lot of small, yeah, I don't know. I guess it depends on the state, like the level of distribution and how that works, like what the regulations are around it. But I totally agree with you. Like we need to be able to drop this
Well,
basically this state mandated middleman model where
you remove two gatekeepers from the scenario to your consumer. Because, for a small farm brand who doesn't have access to distribution, they have to find a distributor to place their product with. They have to pay to package their product. They then have to pay for those manifests to be registered and then delivered, and the whole process thereafter. And then you have to do sales at that point to retail, and it makes it like every extra step makes it prohibitively harder in order to get to the next, because they're all trying to lock down their own networks and try to maintain value, even though I think a lot of people that are between the farm and the consumer are not adding a whole lot of value.
And the level of
Like,
investment in the early legalization period, I mean, like 2018, 19, 2020, people were pouring billions of dollars into the California cannabis industry, much of which has evaporated, much of which was based on strange shell companies listing on the Canadian Stock Exchange, all of this very weird stuff, which we'll get into another time. But there's no, like, I think that to justify that level of spending, to justify that level of gains, like, the market had to become run by conglomerates to make those investors any money whatsoever or make it look like they were doing, like, if you can't make your business profitable, you can at least buy another business and put on your forward looking statements that you're excited that you just bought another business to make your already somewhat nervous investors continue to believe your bullshit. And I think that's gone through several cycles. And I mean, everybody right now is, their companies are being sold off. So yeah, it's not going great.
no, it's definitely you're seeing the industries, I guess, consolidate. Small farms are still holding in. I believe last time I checked, there are like 40 something percent of the market.
It's so hard to do like forward looking predictions in this industry. I mean, you could ask me like, a couple years ago I would have said stuff. These days I don't even really feel very confident in projecting more than like 3 months in the future.
Well, and I think that also is a testament to how small the industry in California is. I mean,
It
once you
really
like
is.
actually look at the graph, it ends up being like 2,500, 3,000 individuals
Yeah, decision
you work
makers are
with. So,
very small amount.
and because the industry is so tight knit, if someone like sours a relationship over here, like you can have a large part of the industry like go in a different direction entirely. I mean, you see this with extraction companies, you see this with cultivations and retails, and where, you know, where they had different plans and went off and did something else, and
Yeah, if two people have drama, that can be like a seismic event, even though it's kind of impossible to trace it back to that. But like, if two big companies decide not to work together, then that has major economic implications across the whole space.
yeah, I mean, or even like even looking at just like small brands, how when you look at because they are working at most with probably 40, 50 retailers, like one of them deciding not to like stock them 1 month or for a couple of months, and then that adds like an entire supply chain disaster there.
This industry never ceases to confuse and amaze me, the way it's built, and we're always kind of trying to dig in and find out more stuff that we can use to help out small farms, or at least give them a little bit of an idea of what the hell's going on. Well, are there any major takeaways that you think that we should leave for the audience today? I would say that
Well,
probably for me, the main one would be that I personally think that the benefits to versus the pros versus the cons of putting the farmer's name on the packaging, I think that the pros definitely win. I think it would lead to a more equitable industry. I think it would lead to arguably a safer industry, and one that is definitely more, allows for more organic price discovery and accurate marketing. That's my main takeaway, that I'm officially recommending that we do that as a state.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, and also like to another factor that I was just thinking of, if you are a distro that is purely middling pounds, like for example from Northern California to some brand in SoCal, if you have to transparently label the product on that brand where the farm came from or where the source of the product was, then that brand can just go and source that product directly from the farm because often brands also operate distribution.
It all comes back to the fact that the mandatory distribution layer is pretty much pointless. It doesn't really need to exist. I mean, distribution as a logistic service, of course, if I want to move something across the state, I'll pay somebody to do that. And if They have to be licensed to do that and to do it securely with certain standards and that cost a fee. Great. But them operating as like a broker or an arbitration of that weed to other people, no, that does nothing but completely snarl up the industry. That was the original sin of California's legalization system, I believe.
I would agree.
Well, on that note, thanks for listening. This has been our first pilot podcast. We've just thrown this at the wall and we're kind of figuring it out. So thank you for bearing with us. We'll probably improve our quality and organization as time goes on. But yeah, thanks for joining us and we will talk to you next time. See ya.
See ya.